Hello and welcome to a special episode of Nothing But the Truth. Major terrorist attacks anywhere in the world can be devastating. They can shatter the confidence of the people and they can have a damaging impact on the mood of a country. And the 6 attacks that happened in Paris yesterday were perhaps the worst terrorist incident in any Western city since 9/11 14 years ago. But what's particularly uncanny, that in a very perverse and chilling way, what happened in Paris also bears similarity to what happened in Mumbai in 26/11. Not only in terms of size and scale, but also in terms of the fact that the attacks were clearly synchronized and very possibly very carefully planned. My guest today is France's ambassador in India, Francois Rchier, and I am particularly glad that he's agreed to speak to us on this sad day. Ambassador, let me start with a few simple questions. You and I were at the same dinner yesterday. This must have been a dreadful shock for you. You must be horrified by what's happened.
Yes, indeed. I'm horrified, and as soon as I left the dinner, a few hours later, I was appraised of what had happened. Of course, our thoughts are with the families, with the injured, but of course we are already thinking in securing the country and ensuring that we will stop this phenomenon very quickly.
But this is something, I take it, that has shaken the whole of France and every Frenchman anywhere in the world. Nothing like this has ever happened in your country.
No. Indeed, we were under attack in January, as you may remember, and that was of a much smaller size. But today the country is in a state of shock, but I think also in a situation of unity and determination.
Let me ask you a little about the facts of what happened. Do we have a clear idea of the number of people killed? I noticed that Reuters has put it at 128, but CNN is suggesting it could be crossing 160.
Yes, indeed. We have already 128 casualties, identified casualties, and 200 injured. So out of these 200, a number are in very bad state. And we can fear that there will be more casualties at the end.
So there's a very sad possibility that the number that will have died could easily reach 150, 160.
Certainly.
And you said we have 200 injured.
Yes.
I believe of that, 99 are said to be critical.
Something like that, yes.
What about the attackers? Reports on television suggest that either they were killed by French police or they blew themselves up. Are the authorities in Paris confident that there are no attackers still wandering around on the loose?
No, we cannot guarantee. This is why a state of emergency was declared yesterday night by the president. And of course that triggers a certain number of consequences in terms of police controls, mobilization of armed forces, and so on. And that will last certainly a few days. Legally speaking, it's 12 days, but it can be longer if necessary, by decision of the parliament.
But the important point you're saying is you can't be confident that all the attackers have been killed, so it's possible, even though it must be very worrying, that there could be some loose in Paris still perhaps threatening the city.
What is a fact today at this point is that there were 8 attackers identified, and there may be other culprits or accomplices running around, yes.
Now, I noticed in his second speech this afternoon, President Hollande said that Daesh had declared war on France. Is your government fairly sure and confident that this is the work of ISIS?
There is an official communiqué from that group, so there is a pretty good chance that this is coming from them. Already yesterday the president declared that we were quite sure from where it was coming from, and this is clearly what we are looking into at present.
Now, as you said a moment ago, this attack happens just 10 months after the attack on Charlie Hebdo. That was a valiant, brave, fearless magazine, and all it did was publish cartoons. Do you have any idea, any speculation about what is the motivation behind these attacks?
As you rightly pointed out, Daesh has declared war against France. As far as this particular event is concerned, there was no specific political target to the extent we can say today. It was a stadium in which a football match was going on in presence of our president. There was a concert hall, and there were restaurants and bars in street. So there is at the moment, as far as we can see, no political target, but just simple people doing what they want to do in a free country.
This suggests that in fact the object of the attacks was to target innocent people doing their normal things.
Indeed.
In other words, to create terror, to create fear.
Indeed.
Do you believe that this is in some sense reprisal for the role that France has been playing in the military campaign in Syria against ISIS?
I think it's an attack on freedom and an attack on the very values of France, which we share with a number of democracies around the world, in particular with India. And the fact that we are fighting against ISIS in the Middle East, but against terrorism in Africa as well, is certainly part of the reasons why this happens. But this is them who declared war against freedom. It's not us.
But will France's commitment to the fight against ISIS continue, or are you perhaps in a position where you may want to rethink that particular commitment?
I think it's very clear that we will continue and that we will win at the end. We are in the midst of a combat which is merciless, but we are conscious of what we are doing and we think we are doing right.
So despite the tragedy and horror that's been inflicted on France, the strength and resilience of the French government and its determination to continue the fight against ISIS, that will continue.
Of the government and of the people of France.
Both.
You have seen in January, under circumstances which of course were less murderous, but of the same kind of idea, and the way the French people have walked in the street by millions against the terrorists, and I think this is the very spirit of the French people today.
Now you mentioned in fact the spirit of the French people. Let's come and talk about Paris, your beautiful capital. Sadly, this is the second terrorist attack in 10 months. Is Paris becoming in some sense uniquely vulnerable?
France indeed is under threat. Since January, I think we have stopped quite a number of attempts. Of course, that was not made public. One was made public recently. It was a plan against the city of Toulon in south of France. So we are not surprised that something is happening, but this one is of a larger scale. But it's just part of a threat that we have been fighting for months and years.
What happened last night was 6 attacks virtually simultaneously, one of them in a stadium where, as you said, President Hollande himself was present. Clearly, both in your country but internationally as well, questions will be asked about intelligence. Was there any inkling, was there any tip-off that perhaps now was ignored or overlooked?
I cannot respond to that question on the basis of the information I have, but what is for sure that we have an excellent intelligence network which has helped us during the last 10 months to stop terrorist attacks. There are so many plans that there was unfortunately chances that one will succeed one day, and this is what had happened.
Absolutely. As Mrs. Thatcher used to say, the government has to be lucky every time. The terrorists have to be lucky only once, and that once was last night. But will now questions be asked about intelligence, about France's capacity, perhaps united with the rest of the European community, to try and ensure this doesn't happen again?
Well, you know, we are a vibrant democracy like India, and questions will be raised and answers will be given. But I think today it is not the time for questions, it is a time for unity and a time for combating terrorism even more than ever.
Now, the attacks happened, as you said, in soft, vulnerable targets. Concert halls, restaurants, bars. And those are places where no state can provide security ever, because people are free to go and come and people want to be free to go and come. What then this morning is the mood of the Parisian people? Are they disturbed? Are they shaken?
They are shaken, they are disturbed, but I think there is a common understanding that the whole country has to be again united and to stay strong, because if we are weak in face of such terrorist attacks, we will be defeated, and we have no intention to be defeated.
You must know many people who've actually been through the terror of last night, either as witnesses or perhaps they were present. What sort of account have they given you of the gruesome horror they've been through?
Of course, at the beginning it was mostly surprise. but very quickly many understood what was going on, because we have a certain level of conscious of the threat which is already existing. So during probably minutes, people were unsure whether it was an attack or an accident. But very quickly, the police, intelligence service realized that it was a multi-pronged attack with suicide bombers. And I think very quickly everybody rallied behind the government.
Now, as you know, Ambassador, when major terrorist attacks happen in cities, whether it's New York, London, Madrid or Mumbai, it has a shattering impact on the city, on the confidence of the people, and it becomes a turning point.
Mm-hmm.
Paris has gone through it twice this year.
Mm-hmm.
Will the Parisian flavor that we've loved begin to change? Will they now be looking over their shoulders wondering, could it happen again?
I'm sure we will look around, that's for sure. But we have been doing this for a long time, and I think the spirit of the city is the one of freedom and the one of joy, and we are not going to let us terrorize. There is fear, there is anxiety all around Paris, but not only around Paris, it's everywhere in France. But again, I think the sentiment that we have to resist, that we have to stay united, is dominant, and that we will win at the end.
Now, I noticed that in his second speech in particular, President Hollande not once but twice called for unity. Is there any fear in France that what happened both yesterday and 10 months earlier could give rise to anti-immigrant, anti-Muslim sentiment?
Yes, that fear can be there, but precisely this is the reason why the call for unity is very important. In France, we do not discriminate among origins or race or religion, and we are very attached to that. We stand united as a nation, and this is one of the most precious treasures we have, and that has helped us during decades, if not centuries, to overcome obstacles and to resist to attacks. I think the spirit is there.
Now, one thing that was clear is that these were very carefully planned attacks. They were synchronized, and clearly the people who did the attacking, the terrorists, knew what they wanted to do. Does that suggest that this was done by people who are resident in France rather than people who came in from outside?
We have no information at this stage. We have 8 terrorists who were killed or who killed themselves during the attacks. We are in the process of identifying who they are, and that could be either people coming from outside or homegrown terrorism, as we could see in January. So this is part of the inquiry, and we are working on that. The
task of identifying who the terrorists are must be very difficult when 7 of them have actually blown themselves up.
Indeed.
So the very forensic necessary operation ahead is made more difficult for you.
Well, of course, but we have some of them who didn't blow them up, and that's sufficient probably to trace the whole group. And now, not only the group, but to trace where the whole operation was engineered and maybe directed.
Now, the President has declared a state of emergency. You said that it could possibly last up to 12 days. Explain to an audience in India, what does a national emergency in France mean?
It means that we have extended power for police and army, that we can order a certain number of security measures which are beyond what generally the police can do on a day-to-day basis. So we have a strengthened security apparatus, and of course as soon as we can, we will lift that. There is no intention to keep that unnecessarily, but as long as it will be necessary, we will. In fact,
President Hollande in his second speech said that in fact people will be noticing a much bigger military presence on the streets.
Yes.
That is one sense in which, in fact, the Parisians will now notice a change.
Well, we had already, since January, a number of army personnel who were dispatched on sensitive sites to support the efforts of the police. So before many religious sites, schools and others, you could see army personnel watching and taking guard. So this is not new. What is currently set up is an increase of the number of personnel. 1,500 were deployed during the night, and maybe more will be today.
Now, France has something like 5 million Muslims. Actually, you don't have an accurate census figure, because deliberately when you do a census, you do not ask people what their religious faith is.
Indeed.
But Pew has estimated the figure at 4.7, others say it's 5 million. It's also believed that somewhere between 1,200 and 1,500 French Muslims are in one way or another involved fighting for ISIS.
Mm-hmm.
How is it that France's Muslim community has come to be so radicalized?
Well, first of all, again, the number of Muslim is a matter of a lot of discussions, because what do we mean by Muslim? Is it a practicing Muslim? Is it somebody of Muslim origin? All this doesn't make sense for us. What is exact is that something like 1,000 and more French nationals have sided with ISIS, and majority of them are combating or were combating or died with Daesh in Syria. So that's, of course, a big matter of concern. We have taken specific measures reinforcing the intelligence apparatus to that end, including specific measures trying to avoid that they can go combating in Syria. But if you look at the figure, even if it looks a large one, it's a very, very tiny group of people. The vast majority of the so-called Muslims or people of Muslim origin in France are good citizens. They work, they vote, they go to cafes and bars, and they go to concert halls, and they go to football match. And so they are part of our nation. We do not discriminate them.
The reason I ask is because France has very strict and rigidly enforced laws and principles about secularism. You don't ask people their religious faith in censuses. You don't like people wearing and displaying religious symbols in public. How then has this small minority, and I admit it's a small minority, come to be so radicalized that they become such a potent threat on horrible instances like last night?
I think, like in many countries, we have faced different ways for radicalization. Internet plays its role. We have also a certain number of imams who have been working on the ground to radicalize the youth. We have had a certain number of converted people who sided with Daesh. So this is something which is not limited to France. We can see similar phenomenon in the UK, in Germany, in Belgium, in many other countries, probably also in India. So this is a world phenomenon. We are one of the victims, but we know that we can count on the solidarity of our friends across the world. I would like in this respect to warmly thank the President of India, the Prime Minister of India, for their very quick messages of solidarity. This is very important for us.
At the moment, Europe is experiencing, and I'm using the word carefully, but a flood of immigrants coming from the Middle East, many from Syria. I imagine that concern about what impact that could have on radicalizing people must be growing at the moment. This must be an issue of concern, particularly after yesterday.
Well, the flow of immigrants coming from Syria and the Middle East is made of people who are fleeing the combats, but who also are probably fleeing dictatorship and fleeing radicalized people, ISIS and so on. They want to live peacefully, and they are trying to take refuge in Europe. We have opened our arms to them. Of course, we know that in the mass of these millions of people, some terrorists could be hidden, could be trying to snoop around into France or into Europe. We are, of course, witnessing this with a lot of attention, and some measures have already been taken to stop some of them.
But that policy of open doors to these people won't change as a result.
You know, when you face a situation like the one in Syria, you have two choices. Either you close your eyes and you close your borders and you close your heart, or you decide to follow the humanitarian route. We have decided to take the humanitarian route, of course, with security measures accompanying this. But I think it's the right choice because this fight is essentially about values. And if people are asking for support, if people are asking for help, we are ready to extend our hand.
Now, tomorrow the G20 will be meeting in Turkey. Understandably, President Hollande is not going. But do you believe the time has come for the G20 as a starting point to seriously create international unity on how you tackle ISIS, Al-Qaeda and jihadi terrorism?
Mm-hmm. That doesn't fall into the traditional mandate of the G20, which was created in the midst of a terrible financial crisis.
Quite right.
But this is a platform which is of political nature. I don't know what will come out of the G20, but I would be surprised that at least individual leaders will be present, will not raise their voice. Indeed, as you rightly pointed out, the President will not go there. He has decided to depute our Foreign Minister and our Finance Minister. They will have talks with a number of leaders there, and the President will stay in Paris with the Prime Minister, with the people of France, and he will, of course, direct and command the action of the security forces.
Now, Prime Minister Modi repeatedly mentions that the world still does not have an agreed definition of terrorism or of what is a terrorist. And there are many countries where what others consider terrorists are actually thought of as freedom fighters. Do we need to at least develop an international consensus on what is terrorism and what is a terrorist?
You know, this debate has been going on in the United Nations for ages. There are some countries who disagree on the basic definition. I think this is a legal problem, but for billions of people around the world, in all types of countries, Muslim or not Muslim, everybody understands what is a terrorist. It is somebody who is fighting against freedom, it is somebody who is fighting against the basic values of democracy, and it is somebody who is doing exactly what those people did yesterday, that is targeting innocent people for a cause that we cannot support.
What about countries that either directly or indirectly actually support terrorism, although they deny it in public? I'm not going to embarrass you by taking names, but there are many such countries, not just in India's neighborhood. Do we need concerted international focused attention on making sure that we stop this and that we don't accept the claim it's not state-sponsored, it's organizations operating outside the state?
Well, this is not a new phenomenon. France itself was victim of such terrorism, which was organized, sponsored, directed from foreign countries. I think the day you can trace the origin of the decision to organize such terrorist attacks, that become, of course, an international issue, and there are ways to punish them or to sue the leaders of these countries. In some cases, we have had to react to such action.
But do you see greater international focus? Would your own president play a role in trying to bring the world together on these issues?
Well, I think it is already very high on the agenda, and if I remember, a series of bilateral declarations between India and France, we have in several cases underlined the role of state-sponsored terrorism targeting countries like India. So this is not something which we ignore or that we just decide not to look at. We are very conscious of what is happening.
Now, Paris is scheduled to hold a major international conference on climate change and the environment. It starts at the end of November, but in December, you could have 70, 80, maybe more heads of state and heads of government coming. After what's happened, will Paris want to reconsider the date? Would you want to postpone it, or are you determined to go ahead?
No decision has been taken in this respect at this point. We cannot already foresee what will be the situation Monday or Tuesday. If there is a second wave of attacks, we cannot foresee what will be the situation in a week from now. So this conference is due to take place as of the 30th of November. We're going to review this, but I think in general we will keep the flag high.
The interesting thing is that you are going to review the situation and you're bearing in mind the possibility there could be a second wave of attacks. That's a possibility you can't rule out.
No. We cannot rule out a second wave, but we were already expecting this conference on climate change to rally thousands and thousands, probably 50,000 people in France. So security measures were already there to try to screen who was coming and to avoid the coming of some individuals we could anticipate could create problems. So there is already security measures which were in our mind. I cannot tell you today what we will have to do by the end of the month.
Ambassador Rchier, thank you very much for speaking to me. My own heartfelt commiserations as well as those of the channel to you, the French government and the French people.
Thank you very much, and I would like to use this opportunity also to thank all the Indians who have sent us messages since this morning. They are by hundreds. Flowers have been handed over to the embassy by individuals, people we have never met before, and I would like to thank all of them. This is really touching our heart. Thank you.
As you would have said in your language, today, aujourd'hui, nous sommes parisiens.
Merci beaucoup.